Blood trickled down Marcus Donovan's temple as security guards pinned him against the airport wall. His wife Eleanor screamed, her designer handbag spilling onto the terminal floor. "We own 60% of this airline," Marcus shouted, but the white flight attendant Veronica Winters just smirked. "Sure you do, and I'm the Queen of England." The airport crowd filmed everything on their phones as the elderly black couple was brutally restrained. Nobody knew that in 48 hours, this viral humiliation would spark the biggest racial discrimination lawsuit in aviation history. Could a moment of prejudice bring down an entire corporation? Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from. If you believe in justice and equal treatment for everyone, hit that like and subscribe button to stay updated on more eye-opening stories like this one. Marcus Donovan's story began in the engine rooms of commercial aircraft, his hands perpetually stained with grease and his pockets empty. At 18, fresh out of high school in 1975, Marcus took the only job available to a young black man with dreams bigger than his opportunities: aircraft maintenance at Southland Regional Airport. Eleanor Robinson was a flight attendant hopeful, one of the first black women to break through the racial barrier in the industry in 1978. Both faced daily indignities. Marcus called boy by white mechanics half his age. Eleanor subjected to random grooming checks no white attendant endured. They met when Eleanor's flight was delayed due to mechanical issues, and she brought coffee to the maintenance crew working overtime. Marcus would later say he fell in love with her kindness before he even saw her face. By 1989, they were married, and pooling their savings to buy a failing aircraft parts supply company. Through relentless work and brilliant business acumen, Horizon Aviation Holdings was born. They expanded methodically. Parts supply became maintenance contracts became small regional carriers, and by 2010, the Donovans controlled a significant portion of the aviation supply chain without most people realizing it. Their most recent acquisition happened just 8 months ago. A 60% stake in struggling Skyline Airways, a mid-sized carrier with prestigious roots but financial troubles. The transaction was handled quietly through shell companies and investment groups, with plans to announce the new ownership after implementing needed reforms. Despite their combined net worth of $3.5 billion, the Donovans lived modestly. Their Atlanta home was certainly upscale, but not ostentatious. They drove luxury vehicles but kept them for years. Their clothing was high quality but understated. Marcus favored hand-tailored suits without flashy labels, while Eleanor preferred simple, elegant dresses from small boutique designers. Wealth should work, not show off, Marcus often told their daughter Michelle, who had followed her parents into the business world after graduating from Howard University. It was Michelle's daughter Zoe, who was graduating from MIT with honors in aerospace engineering tomorrow. The Donovans planned to surprise their granddaughter by attending the ceremony in person, despite telling her business commitments would keep them away. The joy of seeing her face when they appeared would be worth the cross-country flight. "Should we let the airline know we're coming?" Eleanor asked as she packed her overnight bag with her medication and a cashmere sweater. At 65, she suffered from hypertension, managed with daily medication. "No," Marcus decided, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. At 68, his hair had gone completely silver, giving him a distinguished appearance that usually commanded respect. "Usually. I want to see how they treat regular passengers. Best way to evaluate the customer experience is to experience it ourselves." Eleanor nodded, remembering all too well their history with discrimination despite their success. Just last month, a saleswoman at a luxury boutique in Manhattan had suggested she might find something more affordable elsewhere, until the manager recognized her name from the platinum card. 3 years ago, a valet had handed their car keys to a white man standing nearby, assuming Marcus couldn't possibly own a Bentley. The accumulated weight of these incidents had taught them to move through the world with careful dignity, neither expecting fair treatment nor accepting mistreatment. "First-class tickets booked under our names, not the corporate account," Marcus confirmed, showing Eleanor the email confirmation on his phone. "Flight SL477, departing at 10:15. The following morning, they arrived at the airport dressed comfortably but expensively: Italian loafers, cashmere, subtle gold jewelry. Nothing flashy, but to the educated eye, clearly indicating wealth. They moved through security with the practiced ease of frequent travelers and made their way to the Skyline first-class lounge. Eleanor noticed it first. The lounge attendants' smile faltered slightly when she saw them, her greeting noticeably cooler than the one offered to the white couple that entered just before them. When Marcus presented their tickets and IDs, the attendant scrutinized them carefully, tapping her computer keyboard with unwarranted intensity. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked mildly. No problem," the attendant replied without looking up. "Just confirming your reservation." They were eventually admitted, but directed to seats near the restrooms despite the lounge being half empty. Eleanor watched as a white couple who arrived after them was escorted to the premium seating area with window views and offered champagne. No such offer was extended to the Donovans. "Some things never change," Eleanor whispered to Marcus, who simply squeezed her hand in response. Neither was surprised, merely disappointed. This was a familiar dance. The subtle redirections, the microsecond hesitations, the slightly lower quality of service, the invisible but unmistakable message, "You don't belong here." When boarding began, they stood in the first-class line. The white couple in front of them received warm smiles and "Welcome aboard, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson. We're so happy to have you flying with us today." But when the Donovans presented their boarding passes, the agent's demeanor shifted instantly. Her smile remained, but didn't reach her eyes. Her welcome was perfunctory, her tone flat. "Boarding passes, please." "Thank you." "Down the jet bridge to your left." It was a small thing, easily dismissed as imagination or coincidence. But the Donovans had 6 decades of experience recognizing the pattern. This was merely the first indication of what awaited them on board Skyline Airways Flight 477, where their dignity would be challenged in ways they hadn't experienced in years. Veronica Winters had been raised in the affluent suburbs of Connecticut, the daughter of a banking executive and a socialite mother who organized charity galas for causes she never truly understood. At 32, Veronica had worked for Skyline Airways for 7 years, specifically requesting the first-class cabin where she could serve a better class of people, as she once remarked to a colleague. With perfectly highlighted blonde hair and an immaculate uniform, she prided herself on recognizing quality people at a glance, by which she meant those who matched her narrow conception of wealth and status, invariably white, and preferably male. When she saw the elderly black couple approaching the first-class cabin, her expression soured imperceptibly. The man wore a simple gray cashmere sweater over a white button-down shirt, while the woman had on a modest navy dress with a light cardigan. To Veronica's untrained eye, they looked shabby despite their clothing costing more than her monthly salary. In her mind, they couldn't possibly belong in first class. "Boarding passes, please," she requested, her tone notably chillier than it had been for previous passengers. Marcus handed over their documents, which Veronica scrutinized with exaggerated care, flipping them over as if expecting to find evidence of forgery. "These seats are in first class," she said, her tone suggesting this must be a mistake. "Yes, we're aware," Eleanor replied politely. "We purchased first-class tickets." Veronica looked from the boarding passes to their faces and back again. "May I see your IDs as well?" Marcus produced their driver's licenses without comment, though he and Eleanor exchanged knowing glances. No other passengers had been asked for additional identification after presenting valid boarding passes. After prolonged examination, Veronica reluctantly stepped aside. "Seats 3A and 3D, she announced, despite the boarding passes clearly showing 3A and 3B, adjacent seats. "Excuse me," Marcus said calmly. "Our boarding passes show seats 3A and 3B. We should be seated together." Veronica's smile tightened. "The PO system must have made an error. The flight is full and we can't make changes at this point." Marcus knew this was a lie. He had personally checked the flight manifest that morning out of professional curiosity. The first-class cabin was only 70% full. "Perhaps you could check again," Eleanor suggested gently. "We specifically booked seats together." "As I said, the flight is full," Veronica replied with finality. "You'll need to take your assigned seats or wait for the next flight." Reluctantly, they made their way to their seats. Marcus in 3A by the window, Eleanor across the aisle in 3D. The seats between them remained conspicuously empty as boarding continued. As other first-class passengers settled in, Veronica moved through the cabin offering champagne and orange juice. She warmly greeted each white passenger by name. "Mr. Thompson, your usual scotch after takeoff," and "Mrs. Berkowitz, I remembered. You prefer the Veuve Clicquot," demonstrating she had reviewed the passenger manifest and remembered preferences. Yet when she reached the Donovans, she passed by without offering beverages. After serving everyone else, Marcus raised his hand politely. "Excuse me, could we get some water, please?" Veronica glanced at him as if noticing him for the first time. "I'll be with you after we complete boarding," she replied curtly, though she immediately afterward delivered another glass of champagne to a white businessman who hadn't even requested it. From across the aisle, Eleanor observed as Veronica huddled with another flight attendant, Clayton Reed, a tall man with a perpetual frown. They whispered together, occasionally glancing in the Donovans' direction and sharing what appeared to be amused smiles. The temperature in the cabin was uncomfortably cool. Eleanor, sensitive to cold due to her age and medication, opened her handbag to retrieve her cardigan. As she did so, Veronica passed by and loudly remarked to no one in particular. First-class passengers usually know to use the closets for their belongings, not clutter the cabin with cheap bags. Eleanor's handbag was a handcrafted Italian leather piece that had been a gift from Marcus on their 40th anniversary. It was worth more than Veronica's monthly salary, but its understated elegance was lost on someone who equated quality with flashy logos. After takeoff, when the cabin service began, every passenger received hot towels, except the Donovans. When meals were served, the flight attendant started from the front and worked their way back, leaving the Donovans until last, despite Marcus being in the third row. When they finally received their meals, Eleanor's request for a blanket was met with a loud, pointed suggestion from Veronica. "If you're cold, perhaps you'd be more comfortable in economy. They keep it warmer back there for those kinds of passengers." The implication was clear, and several nearby passengers looked up in shock at the barely veiled racism. An older white woman in the row ahead turned around with a concerned expression, making brief eye contact with Eleanor before quickly looking away, unwilling to get involved. "What do you think about Veronica's behavior toward the Donovans?" Comment. Number 1. If you believe her actions were clearly discriminatory, or number 2, if you think there could be another explanation. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support stories that expose the reality of racism that still exists in our society today. Have you ever witnessed or experienced similar treatment? How would you react if you were in Marcus and Eleanor's position? Would you speak up immediately or document everything for later action? The situation is about to escalate dramatically, and the Donovans' response will change the course of their journey in ways no one could have predicted. Marcus took a deep breath, centering himself before speaking. Decades of navigating white-dominated business environments had taught him that displaying anger, no matter how justified, would only reinforce stereotypes and potentially escalate the situation. He needed to remain calm, articulate, and dignified. The burden of proof always fell heavier on his shoulders simply because of his skin color. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of authority he had cultivated as CEO of a billion-dollar company. "My wife and I have purchased first-class tickets. Here are our boarding passes again." He held them up, though he knew perfectly well Veronica had already seen them. "We're entitled to the same service as other passengers in this cabin." Veronica's expression hardened. "Sir, I'm simply following company procedures." "Which procedures? Specifically require you to provide different levels of service based on appearances?" Marcus asked calmly. Veronica's eyes widened slightly, caught off guard by the direct challenge. "I'll need to get my supervisor," she said, her voice tight. "Please do," Eleanor agreed. Some of the other passengers were now openly watching the interaction, several discreetly holding up phones, recording. Minutes later, Clayton Reed approached, his tall frame looming over Marcus, who remained seated. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, directing his question to Veronica rather than the Donovans. "These passengers are being disruptive," Veronica reported, loud enough for surrounding travelers to hear. They're complaining about the service and making accusations. We've simply requested the same treatment other passengers are receiving, Eleanor clarified, her voice calm but firm. We've been ignored, separated despite booking adjacent seats, and just now your colleague suggested we might be more comfortable in economy, which seems to imply we don't belong in first class. Clayton barely glanced at Eleanor, keeping his attention fixed on Marcus as if expecting him to be the greater threat. Sir, if you can't maintain appropriate behavior in first class, we'll have no choice but to take further action. The implication that they didn't know how to behave in first class was another subtle jab, one the Donovans recognized immediately as part of the familiar pattern of racial profiling. Nearby, a white businessman loudly complained about the temperature in the cabin, his voice rising in obvious irritation, yet neither Veronica nor Clayton suggested he was being disruptive. All we want is to be treated with the same courtesy extended to other passengers, Marcus stated. Nothing more, nothing less. Clayton crossed his arms. I understand, sir, but my colleague informs me you've been confrontational since boarding. That is simply untrue, Eleanor interjected, reaching into her bag for her phone. In fact, I've been documenting the differential treatment. Perhaps you'd like to review it? As Eleanor moved, her elbow accidentally knocked against her seat's tray table, causing her prescription pill container to roll off and scatter small white tablets across the floor of the cabin. Her blood pressure medication, essential for managing her condition, now lay scattered under seats and in the aisle. "Oh!" she exclaimed, immediately reaching down to retrieve them. "Please remain in your seat during turbulence," Veronica snapped, despite the fact that the flight was completely smooth and the seatbelt sign was off. "Those are my wife's blood pressure medications," Marcus explained, already unfastening his seatbelt to help. "She needs to take them on schedule." "Sir, I asked you to stay seated," Clayton said, his tone suddenly authoritative. When Marcus continued to reach for the scattered pills, Clayton placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Sir, I need you to comply immediately." "I'm simply retrieving my wife's medication," Marcus replied, shrugging off Clayton's hand. It was a normal, instinctive response to unwanted physical contact, but Clayton immediately stepped back as if threatened. "He's becoming aggressive," Clayton announced loudly. Several passengers looked up in alarm, though what they saw was simply an elderly man calmly picking up pills from the floor. "I'm not being aggressive in any way," Marcus stated clearly, aware that the situation was deteriorating rapidly. "I'm retrieving necessary medication." "I've called the air marshal," Veronica declared, having disappeared briefly to the galley and returned. "We have an unruly passenger who's refusing crew instructions and becoming physically threatening." Eleanor looked shocked. "That's absolutely false. My husband hasn't threatened anyone." Within minutes, a plainclothes air marshal appeared, a stocky white man who hadn't been noticeable among the passengers earlier. He approached with hand on his concealed weapon. "Sir, I need you to return to your seat immediately." Marcus, still holding several of Eleanor's pills, slowly straightened up. "My wife needs her medication. It's for a heart condition." "Sir, final warning. Return to your seat now and keep your hands where I can see them," the marshal ordered. The entire first-class cabin had gone silent, every eye on the unfolding scene. With deliberate slowness, Marcus handed the recovered pills to Eleanor, then sat down, keeping his hands visible on the armrests. The marshal stood directly beside his seat, effectively restraining him in place without physical contact. "This is outrageous," a younger black woman spoke up from 2 rows back. "He was just picking up medication. I've been watching this whole thing, and these flight attendants have been treating this couple terribly from the start." "Ma'am, please don't involve yourself," the marshal replied without looking at her. Clayton spoke into the cabin phone, and moments later, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a situation in the cabin, we're going to return to the gate. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." A collective groan rose from the passengers, along with glares directed at the Donovans, not because most had seen them do anything wrong, but because they were now being framed as the cause of a delay. The flight had been in the air for less than 30 minutes and was now returning to Seattle. Eleanor reached across the aisle, trying to take Marcus's hand, but the air marshal stepped between them. "Please remain in your seat, ma'am." "That's my husband," Eleanor said, her voice finally betraying emotion. "We've done nothing wrong." "We'll sort this out at the gate," the marshal replied without sympathy. Marcus sat rigidly upright, his expression controlled but his eyes revealing the profound indignity of the moment. In over 40 years of business travel, through all the subtle and not-so-subtle racism he'd experienced, he had never been treated as a criminal simply for existing in a space someone felt he didn't belong. The fact that he partially owned the very airline treating him this way added a layer of bitter irony. Eleanor, meanwhile, felt her heart racing dangerously. Without all her medication properly taken, and under extreme stress, she was at real medical risk. She tried to communicate this to Veronica, who walked past deliberately ignoring her raised hand. Only when another passenger, an older white woman, called out, "She needs medical attention," did Clayton reluctantly approach. "What's the problem now?" he asked with obvious irritation. "I need the rest of my medication. I have a heart condition, and this situation is causing my blood pressure to rise dangerously," Eleanor explained, her medical training from her early career giving her the vocabulary to express the seriousness of her condition. Clayton looked skeptical, but went through the motions of concern. "We'll have medical personnel meet the aircraft at the gate." As the plane began its descent back to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, Marcus and Eleanor Donovan sat separated by an aisle but united in the familiar, exhausting knowledge that no amount of wealth, education, or achievement could fully shield them from the fundamental injustice of racial prejudice. What they didn't yet realize was that this incident would trigger a chain of events that would expose not just individual bias, but systemic discrimination at every level of the company they quietly owned. The aircraft taxied back to the terminal, coming to a stop at Gate A7. The same gate they had departed from just 45 minutes earlier was now the site of what would become a viral confrontation. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Again, "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the inconvenience. Local authorities will be boarding the aircraft to address a situation with disruptive passengers. Please remain seated until further instructions." The use of plural, passengers, rather than passenger, was deliberate, implying that both Marcus and Eleanor were problematic, though Eleanor had done nothing more than advocate for her husband and request her medication. 2 police officers and 4 airport security personnel boarded the plane, directed immediately to the first-class cabin by Veronica, who pointed dramatically at the Donovans. "Those are the passengers causing the disturbance," she declared loudly. "They've been belligerent and threatening since boarding." Eleanor, feeling lightheaded from stress and her interrupted medication schedule, looked imploringly at the officers. "Please, I need medical attention. I have a heart condition." One officer, a younger Latino man, showed brief concern, but his older white partner took charge of the situation. "Ma'am, sir, I need you both to gather your belongings and exit the aircraft." "We've done nothing wrong," Marcus stated firmly. "We were discriminated against by your flight crew, denied service provided to other passengers, and when my wife's medication fell, I was treated as a threat for simply picking it up." "Sir, you can discuss your complaints after deplaning." "Right. Now you need to exit the aircraft," the older officer insisted. "My wife needs medical attention," Marcus repeated. "She hasn't been able to take her full medication, and this situation is endangering her health." "Medical personnel will meet us in the terminal," the officer replied, though no such arrangement had actually been made. With careful dignity, Marcus stood, retrieved their small carry-on items from the overhead bin, and offered his arm to Eleanor. The officers flanked them closely as if they were criminals being escorted to booking, rather than elderly passengers who had committed no offense. As they walked toward the front of the aircraft, Veronica made a show of stepping back, as if afraid Marcus might assault her. The theatrical nature of her movement was obvious to many passengers, several of whom continued recording on their phones. "This is wrong," one man called out. "I was watching the whole thing. They didn't do anything." "Sir, please stay out of the situation," an officer responded curtly. The Donovans walked through first class, past business class, and then the front section of economy, a humiliating parade witnessed by hundreds of passengers. At the aircraft door, Clayton stood with his arms crossed. "Skyline Airways reserves the right to refuse service to anyone disturbing our operation," he recited, clearly performing for the officers rather than addressing a legitimate concern. It was then that Marcus, maintaining his composure but reaching the limits of his patience, made the statement that would later become the centerpiece of viral videos. "You should know that my wife and I own 60% of Skyline Airways through Horizon Aviation Holdings. Your jobs in this entire airline exist because of our investment." Veronica let out a theatrical laugh. "Sure, and I'm next in line for the British throne." "It's the truth," Eleanor added, her voice weaker but still determined. "We acquired majority ownership 8 months ago. The announcement was pending implementation of new company policies, including anti-discrimination, training that you two clearly need." Clayton smirked. "If you owned the airline, you'd be flying private. Security, please remove these passengers who are now delaying an entire aircraft with their fantasies." In the jet bridge, away from the aircraft, but still within sight of the terminal windows where passengers and airport visitors could observe, the situation deteriorated further. Eleanor stumbled, lightheaded from her medical condition and the stress of the situation. Marcus reached out to steady her, but one of the security guards misinterpreted his quick movement and roughly grabbed his arm. "Sir, keep your hands where we can see them," the guard shouted unnecessarily loudly. "My wife is unwell. She needs her medication and medical attention," Marcus replied with justified urgency. Instead of addressing the medical concern, 2 security guards interpreted Marcus's raised voice as aggression. They moved to restrain him, forcing him against the wall of the jet bridge with unnecessary roughness. His glasses fell to the floor and were crushed under a security guard's boot. Marcus's temple struck the wall hard enough to break the skin, and blood began trickling down the side of his face. Eleanor screamed at the sight of her husband being manhandled. "Stop it! He's done nothing wrong. He's 68 years old." As she rushed toward Marcus, another security guard blocked her path, causing her designer handbag to fall and spill its contents across the jet bridge floor. Medication bottles, her phone, wallet, and personal items scattering in all directions. Through the terminal windows, dozens of witnesses watched in horror as an elderly black couple was treated with shocking aggression by airport security. Phones came up, recording through the glass, capturing images that would soon circulate worldwide. Marcus Donovan, blood streaming from his temple, pinned against a wall by 2 security guards while his wife Eleanor knelt on the floor, desperately trying to gather her scattered belongings while a guard towered over her. "You're making a terrible mistake," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "I am Marcus Donovan, CEO of Horizon Aviation Holdings. We own controlling interest in Skyline Airways." "Sure you do," one guard sneered. "And I'm the King of Sweden." What none of them realized was that among the passengers watching from the terminal was Imani Washington, social media director for a major civil rights organization, who was already live streaming the incident to her 300,000 followers. "I'm witnessing what appears to be racial profiling and excessive force being used against an elderly black couple at Seattle-Tacoma Airport," her steady voice narrated. "The couple is being forcibly removed from Skyline Airways Flight 477, and the man is bleeding after security slammed him into a wall. They appear to be in their 60s or 70s and pose no visible threat." By the time Marcus and Eleanor were escorted through the terminal, he with blood still visible on his face, she leaning heavily on a small wheeled oxygen tank that airport medical personnel had finally provided. The video had already been viewed 20,000 times. Hashtags were forming, screenshots were being shared. A digital wildfire was beginning that would soon engulf Skyline Airways in a crisis no PR team could extinguish. And still, the Donovans maintained their dignity. Neither shouted or resisted. They did not cause a scene or demand special treatment. They simply stated facts that were dismissed as fantasy by those too blinded by prejudice to recognize the truth. That the elderly black couple they had humiliated and assaulted were not just passengers, but the majority owners of the very airline that employed them. As they were led to a security office for questioning, Eleanor whispered to Marcus, "This ends today, not just for us, but for everyone who's ever been treated this way, without the resources to fight back." Marcus nodded slightly, wincing at the pain in his temple. Systemic change. he agreed softly. Nothing less. The security office door closed behind them, temporarily shielding them from public view. But the damage was done, not to the Donovans' reputation, but to Skyline Airways. The videos were multiplying across social media platforms. News organizations were picking up the story. And in the corporate headquarters 3,000 miles away, phones were about to start ringing with questions no one was prepared to answer about why an elderly black couple had been bloodied and humiliated for simply existing in first class. The first video hit Twitter at 11:47 a.m. Pacific Time, posted by Imani Washington with the caption, "Happening now. Elderly black couple forcibly removed from a Skyline Air first class. Man bleeding after security assault. Flying while black was Skyline shame." Within minutes, it had been shared thousands of times. By noon, 3 more videos from different angles appeared online. One showing the initial confrontation on the plane, another capturing Eleanor's desperate attempts to explain her medical condition, and a particularly damning clip of Veronica mockingly dismissing Marcus's claim of ownership. At 12:23 p.m., a passenger from business class uploaded a 4-minute compilation that showed the entire sequence of events from boarding to deplaning. This video, shot discreetly over the passenger's shoulder, clearly captured the differential treatment. Veronica warmly welcoming white passengers while coldly dismissing the Donovans. The hashtag, justice, for the Donovans began trending nationally by 1 p.m. Skyline Airways' social media team, unprepared for the crisis, issued a boilerplate statement at 1:17 p.m. Skyline Airways takes all passenger complaints seriously. We are investigating an incident involving disruptive passengers on Flight 477. The safety of all passengers is our top priority. This generic response, which implicitly blamed the victims by calling them disruptive, only fueled public outrage. Responses flooded in beneath the statement. "I was on that flight. That elderly couple did nothing wrong. Your flight attendants racially profiled them from the moment they stepped on board. Your crew called security on an old man for picking up his wife's heart medication. I'll never fly Skyline again. There's blood on that man's face. Your security did that to a senior citizen. Disgusting." By 2 p.m., the story had jumped from social media to mainstream news sites. "Elderly black couple forcibly removed from first class," read the headlines. Initial reports were careful not to confirm the Donovans' claim of ownership, instead describing them as an elderly couple who claimed to be major shareholders in the airline. News vans began assembling outside Skyline's Seattle offices and at their corporate headquarters in Atlanta. At 3:15 p.m., Skyline's CEO Philip Whitman issued a video statement, his expression stern and unapologetic. Skyline Airways has a strict policy against disruptive behavior that endangers crew members or other passengers. While the imagery circulating online is concerning, it doesn't show the full context. Our crew members acted according to protocol when faced with non-compliance. We stand by our team members and their professional judgment. This response ignited a new explosion of outrage. Celebrity activists began sharing the videos with their millions of followers. Civil rights organizations issued statements condemning Skyline's response. By evening, the story had made national television news, with experts analyzing the footage frame by frame. Meanwhile, Marcus and Eleanor Donovan had been released from airport security with no charges filed. Another fact that contradicted Skyline's claim of disruptive behavior. They checked into the presidential suite at Seattle's most exclusive hotel under aliases, declining all media requests through their personal attorney who had flown in from Atlanta on their private jet. While the public narrative unfolded online, internet sleuths began digging deeper. Someone discovered Veronica Winter's personal Instagram account, which had not been properly secured. Screenshots of her post from 3 years earlier showed troubling comments about keeping air travel exclusive and complaints about having to serve certain types of people who don't appreciate luxury. Another post showed her at a Halloween party dressed in a costume many considered culturally insensitive. Clayton Reed's LinkedIn profile revealed a history of employment discrimination complaints at his previous airline, though none had resulted in formal charges. These personal details, while not officially connected to Skyline's corporate policies, painted a picture of individual employees whose prejudices had been allowed to flourish unchecked in the company culture. By 7 p.m., Skyline's stock had dropped 11% in after-hours trading as investors anticipated the fallout. The company's customer service lines were overwhelmed with callers canceling reservations and rewards program members renouncing their loyalty status. Major corporate clients began issuing statements, reviewing their travel provider relationships. What few people knew was that Marcus and Eleanor Donovan, from their hotel suite, were watching everything unfold with methodical attention. They weren't giving interviews or making public statements. They were gathering evidence, consulting with their legal team, and preparing for the real battle that would begin the next morning. "Look at this," Eleanor said, showing Marcus a particular comment thread where dozens of Black travelers were sharing similar experiences on Skyline flights. "This isn't just about us. This is happening every day." Marcus nodded grimly, holding an ice pack to his temple. "And now we have the power to do something about it." "Do they have any idea what's coming?" Eleanor wondered, scrolling through Philip Whitman's defensive statement again. "No," Marcus answered simply, "but they will." By midnight, the original videos had collectively been viewed over 50 million times. Skyline Airways' public rating had plummeted to 1.2 stars out of 5. Celebrities were publicly canceling their partnerships with the airline. And still, the Donovans had not spoken publicly. Their silence was strategic, letting the evidence speak for itself while they marshaled their considerable resources for the confrontation to come. What would you do if you witnessed racial discrimination on a flight? Comment number 1 if you would speak up immediately to support the victims, or number 2 if you would record evidence to share later. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of race or background. The power of social media has turned this private incident into a public reckoning. But what happens when the Donovans finally reveal their true position? Will Skyline Airways leadership realize their mistake before it's too late? Or are they about to face consequences beyond anything they could imagine? Stay tuned for what happens next in this shocking true story of power, prejudice, and long overdue justice. At 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time, an emergency board meeting of Skyline Airways was convened at the company's Atlanta headquarters. CEO Philip Whitman, a 60-year-old white man with silver hair and a perpetual tan, paced the boardroom as executive team members filed in with grim expressions. Stock prices had fallen an additional 7% in pre-market trading. The hashtag #BoycottSkyline was the top trending topic nationwide. Major news networks were running the story hourly. "This will blow over," Whitman insisted, though his tense jaw betrayed his concern. "We've weathered PR storms before. Our legal team is preparing a statement clarifying that proper protocols were followed." Rebecca Chen, the chief marketing officer, shook her head. "Phil, this isn't just a PR problem. The optics are horrific. An elderly Black couple with blood on their faces surrounded by security guards. In this climate, we need to issue an apology immediately, suspend the employees involved, and announce a full investigation." "Apologize for what?" snapped Whitman. "For enforcing our policies? That's a slippery slope I'm not willing to climb. Those passengers were disruptive, regardless of their race." "The videos don't support that claim," countered Michael O'Brien, the chief financial officer. "I've watched all of them. Multiple times. There's no evidence they were disruptive. And now our stock is in free fall. Major corporate accounts are threatening to cancel their contracts." The boardroom door opened, and Eliza Haraway, the company's general counsel, rushed in looking distinctly pale. "We have a serious problem," she announced, clutching a tablet. "I've been on calls all night with our legal team and outside counsel." "What now?" Whitman demanded. "The couple from yesterday's incident, Marcus and Eleanor Donovan. I've been researching them." She swallowed hard. "They're the principals behind Horizon Aviation Holdings." The room went silent. "So what?" Whitman finally said. "They're in the industry. That doesn't change anything about yesterday." Eliza placed the tablet on the table. Horizon Aviation Holdings acquired a 60% stake in Skyline Airways 8 months ago through a series of shell companies and investment groups. The final paperwork was filed with the SEC last week. It hasn't been publicly announced yet, but it's official. She looked around the room. The Donovans are our majority shareholders. They own this airline." The silence that followed was absolute. Executives exchanged shocked glances as the full implications sank in. That's impossible," Whitman finally stammered. "I would have been informed of any controlling purchase. It was structured to avoid triggering immediate disclosure requirements," Eliza explained. "Perfectly legal, but designed for a quiet transition. According to my sources, they were planning to announce the acquisition next month, after implementing new company policies." She paused meaningfully. "Including comprehensive anti-discrimination training." Rebecca Chen let out a low whistle. "So our flight attendants racially profiled, publicly humiliated, and physically injured our new owners?" "Precisely," Eliza confirmed. "And Mr. Whitman just went on national television defending those actions and refusing to apologize." The boardroom erupted into chaos, executives talking over each other, demands for immediate action, questions about legal liability. Whitman stood frozen, his career flashing before his eyes. "Get them on the phone," he finally ordered. "I need to speak with them immediately. Offer whatever they want. A personal apology, compensation, executive changes." Eliza shook her head. "I've been trying since 5 a.m. They're not taking our calls. Their attorneys say all communication must go through proper channels, meaning the board, which they now control." While this revelation was sending shockwaves through Skyline's executive suite, the public narrative was evolving in even more damaging directions. An anonymous employee had leaked internal emails from 3 months earlier, showing a directive to flight attendants about maintaining the exclusive atmosphere of first class, with instructions to ensure passengers meet the expected profile. Language vague enough to provide plausible deniability, but specific enough that frontline staff understood the racial coding. More passengers came forward with stories of similar treatment. One black executive detailed how she was repeatedly asked to verify her first-class ticket, while white passengers boarded without question. A famous black musician shared how flight attendants had followed him to the bathroom, apparently concerned he might attempt to steal something. A group of black medical doctors recounted being assumed to be in the wrong cabin despite wearing professional attire. The pattern was becoming undeniable, and Skyline's initial defensive stance made them appear not just guilty of a single incident, but complicit in systemic discrimination. By noon, Philip Whitman was desperate. He personally called every number associated with the Donovans, but couldn't get past their gatekeepers. He sent emails that went unanswered. He even dispatched a senior vice president to their hotel in Seattle, only to learn they had already departed on their private jet. "Where are they now?" he demanded during a hastily convened crisis meeting. "According to flight plans filed with the FAA," Eliza reported, checking her tablet. "Their jet landed at Hartsfield-Jackson an hour ago." Whitman paled. "They're here? In Atlanta?" "Yes," Eliza confirmed. "And they've called for an emergency. Board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. "Tomorrow? That's not possible. Proper notice requirements are waived in the company bylaws for majority shareholders facing extraordinary circumstances," Eliza finished for him. "They're well within their rights. All board members have been notified, including the institutional investors. Everyone will attend." She glanced at her watch. "They've also retained Hannigan and Associates." Whitman sank into his chair. Hannigan and Associates was the most feared corporate litigation firm in the country, specializing in discrimination cases and corporate malfeasance. "We're finished," he muttered. While Skyline's leadership grappled with their new reality, Marcus and Eleanor Donovan were meeting with their expanded legal and PR team at their Atlanta home. They reviewed the videos, the leaked emails, and the statements from other passengers. Most importantly, they studied the internal data their ownership position now gave them access to. Customer complaint statistics broken down by race, employee discipline records, promotion patterns. The numbers told a damning story. Black passengers were 3 times more likely to be questioned about their ticket status, twice as likely to be denied upgrades even with identical status levels, and 5 times more likely to be reported for disruptive behavior than white passengers with similar profiles. "This isn't about one incident or 2 bad employees," Marcus observed grimly. "This is systemic. The culture starts at the top." Eleanor nodded. And that's where the change must begin. That evening, as speculation ran wild online about the Donovan's next move, Marcus received a desperate phone call. Philip Whitman had finally managed to get through. "Mr. Donovan," he began, his voice artificially warm. "First, let me express my sincere apologies for the unfortunate incident yesterday. There was clearly a misunderstanding, and I assure you the employees involved have been suspended pending investigation." Marcus listened silently. "I've just learned about your investment in our company," Whitman continued, his voice betraying his anxiety. "I want to personally welcome you as our most valued shareholder. I'm sure we can work together to address any concerns you might have." After a long pause, Marcus finally spoke. "Mr. Whitman, my wife and I were treated like criminals for the crime of being black in first class. Your employees mocked us, denied us service, fabricated a disruption, and had us physically removed from the flight. Security guards drew blood from a 68-year-old man who was simply retrieving his wife's heart medication, and your response was to defend these actions publicly and blame us." "I was working with limited information at the time," Whitman protested weakly. "No, you were working with limited integrity," Marcus corrected. "I'll see you at tomorrow's board meeting. I suggest you bring a letter of resignation." The line went dead, leaving Whitman staring at his phone in shock. For the first time, he understood that this wasn't a PR crisis that could be managed with careful statements and token gestures. This was a reckoning, one that had been decades in the making, enabled by a corporate culture that had tolerated and implicitly encouraged the kind of treatment the Donovans had experienced. As night fell over Atlanta, two visions of Skyline Airways competed for the future. Whitman's, where the status quo would be preserved with minimal changes and performative apologies, and the Donovans, where systemic discrimination would be confronted and dismantled regardless of the discomfort it caused. By morning, only one vision would remain. Philip Whitman wasn't going down without a fight. After Marcus hung up on him, the CEO called an emergency meeting with his most trusted executives and Skyline's head of security, a former FBI agent named Richard Dalton. "I need everything you can find on the Donovans," Whitman instructed. "Everyone has skeletons. Find theirs." "Sir, is that really the best approach given the circumstances?" asked Rebecca Chen, uncomfortable with the direction. "They want to take my company," Whitman snapped. "I built Skyline from a regional carrier to an international airline. I'm not going to let two people destroy my legacy over one misunderstanding." "Technically, it's their company now," Michael O'Brien pointed out. "Majority shareholders." "Shareholders can be pressured to sell," Whitman countered. "If we make this ugly enough, they might decide Skyline isn't worth the headache." By midnight, Dalton had assembled a team of private investigators with instructions to dig into every aspect of the Donovans' lives: business dealings, tax records, personal relationships, anything that might provide leverage. Their first move was to plant stories with friendly media contacts suggesting the Donovans were opportunistic investors looking to manufacture a discrimination incident to drive down Skyline's stock price before a complete takeover. Sources close to the airline industry questioned timing of viral confrontation, read one headline on a business news site. Another financial blog published an anonymous expert analysis suggesting the Donovans had a history of targeting companies with controversial takeovers. None of these claims had factual basis, but they created doubt in the narrative, exactly as intended. Meanwhile, Veronica Winters was coached by Skyline's PR team for a series of carefully orchestrated interviews. Appearing on a sympathetic morning show with her voice quavering and eyes brimming with tears, she portrayed herself as a dedicated employee being canceled over a misunderstanding. "I would never discriminate against anyone," she insisted, dabbing at her eyes. "I've served passengers of all backgrounds for 7 years. This incident is being completely misrepresented on social media. The Donovans were disruptive from the moment they boarded, demanding special treatment and intimidating staff." When the host gently questioned whether there might have been a misunderstanding given the couple's age and Mrs. Donovan's medical condition, Veronica's expression hardened momentarily before she recovered. They never mentioned any medical conditions until after they became confrontational. We take passenger health very seriously at Skyline Airways. This directly contradicted video evidence showing Eleanor explicitly mentioning her heart condition and medication multiple times, but Veronica was counting on many viewers not having seen the full footage. Clayton Reed gave a separate interview to a conservative news outlet, portraying himself as a dedicated professional following security protocols. In today's environment, we can't afford to ignore potential threats, regardless of a passenger's age or appearance, he explained. The Donovans became belligerent when asked to comply with standard procedures. Mr. Donovan made aggressive movements toward crew members. We had no choice but to involve security. Again, the available video evidence showed no such aggression. But Skyline's strategy wasn't concerned with facts, only with muddying the waters enough to create an alternative narrative. Their most aggressive move came when Skyline's legal team filed for a temporary restraining order to prevent the emergency board meeting, claiming the Donovans had violated SEC disclosure requirements in their acquisition of company shares. While legal experts widely viewed this as a desperate delay tactic with little merit, it created headlines questioning the legitimacy of the Donovans' ownership position. Simultaneously, the private investigators Whitman had hired began approaching passengers from Flight 477, offering substantial compensation for statements contradicting the viral videos. Most refused, but 2 passengers in business class who hadn't witnessed the full incident agreed to sign carefully worded affidavits describing the Donovans as loud and disruptive during boarding. The crowning element of the counterattack came when a gossip site published an exclusive report claiming an anonymous source had revealed Marcus Donovan had previous anger management issues with a supposed incident at a country club 5 years earlier. The story was entirely fabricated, but it spread rapidly across less reputable news sites. Eleanor was not spared either. Another tabloid ran a piece suggesting she had connections to radical organizations based on her philanthropy work with civil rights groups. The innuendo was clear, painting the respected business leaders as troublemakers with political agendas rather than victims of discrimination. This multi-pronged attack unfolded with remarkable speed, all orchestrated within 18 hours of the original incident. Whitman believed that by morning, enough doubt would exist in the public narrative that he could enter the board meeting, assuming the courts didn't delay it, with some leverage. What he hadn't counted on was the Donovans' preparation. Their decades in business had taught them to anticipate exactly this kind of desperate counterattack. Their legal team had already filed anti-defamation notices against media outlets publishing unsubstantiated claims. Their PR team was methodically documenting the smear campaign as further evidence of Skyline's toxic culture. And most importantly, their forensic accountants and data analysts were working through the night, combing through Skyline's internal systems that their ownership position now gave them access to. At 2:17 a.m., their persistence paid off. A junior analyst discovered a text message exchange preserved in Skyline's internal communication archive between Veronica Winters and Clayton Reed from the morning of the flight. First class overbooked by 2. Moving those people to 3A and 3D instead of together. Clayton's response: saw them at the gate. Keep those people where they belong. Too many of them up front these days. The exchange was time-stamped 45 minutes before the Donovans even boarded, proving the separation of their seats was deliberate and racially motivated, not a system error as claimed. Within an hour, the Donovans' legal team had obtained an emergency court order preserving all of Skyline's electronic communications, preventing any potential destruction of evidence. The judge who reviewed the text messages not only granted the order, but also denied Skyline's request to delay the board meeting, citing compelling evidence of potential corporate malfeasance warranting immediate shareholder review. By dawn, Philip Whitman's counterattack was already failing. Major media outlets, initially hesitant to take sides, began reporting on the coordinated smear campaign against the Donovans. The fabricated country club incident was quickly debunked when the country club in question issued a statement confirming Marcus Donovan had been a respected member for 15 years without a single complaint. Civil rights organizations published statements defending Eleanor's legitimate philanthropic work. Most damaging of all, 3 more Skyline employees came forward as whistleblowers, confirming that racial profiling of passengers was an unofficial, but widely understood practice, particularly in premium cabins. One former flight attendant provided screenshots of a group chat where crew members regularly mocked minority passengers who didn't know how to act in first class. As morning broke over Atlanta, the Donovans dressed carefully for the board, meeting that would determine Skyline's future. Eleanor chose a tailored Oscar de la Renta suit in deep burgundy, while Marcus wore a custom Tom Ford suit in charcoal gray. Their clothing, impeccable, expensive, and unmistakably high-end, was a deliberate statement, contrasting with the shabby appearance Veronica had derided. "Ready?" Marcus asked, adjusting his new glasses to cover the still visible bruise on his temple. Eleanor nodded, tucking her medication into a Hermes handbag. "They tried to erase our dignity," she said quietly. "Today we reclaim it, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who ever boarded a flight and was made to feel they didn't belong," Marcus finished. They clasped hands briefly before stepping into the waiting car, prepared for the boardroom battle that awaited them. The Skyline Airways corporate headquarters occupied the top 10 floors of a gleaming glass tower in downtown Atlanta. The boardroom on the 50th floor featured floor-to-ceiling windows with panoramic views of the city skyline, a testament to the company's power and prestige built over 3 decades under Philip Whitman's leadership. At precisely 8:45 a.m., Marcus and Eleanor Donovan stepped off the executive elevator, accompanied by their legal team and chief financial officer. The security guards who had been briefed about their arrival stood awkwardly at attention, their confusion evident as they tried to reconcile the elegant, composed couple before them with the disruptive passengers described in company communications. "Mr. and Mrs. Donovan," one guard said, clearly recognizing them from the viral videos. "Welcome to Skyline headquarters." The simple greeting, acknowledging them by name with basic courtesy, stood in stark contrast to their treatment, less aiwas, than 48 hours earlier. They nodded in acknowledgement but continued walking, their expressions revealing nothing. Inside the boardroom, 12 people sat around the massive oak table, Skyline's executive team and representatives from institutional investors. Philip Whitman occupied the chair at the head of the table, a position he clearly intended to maintain, despite the circumstances. When the Donovans entered, there was a collective intake of breath. The bruise on Marcus's temple was still visible despite his attempt to conceal it. More surprising to those who had only seen the viral videos was the undeniable aura of authority they projected. These were not ordinary passengers who had stumbled into first class, but sophisticated business leaders who had navigated corporate America for decades. "Mr. and Mrs. Donovan," Whitman began, standing and extending his hand with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "On behalf of everyone at Skyline Airways, let me express our deepest regrets for the unfortunate incident during your flight. I assure you the employees involved have been suspended pending a full investigation." Marcus ignored the outstretched hand. "Mr. Whitman, we'll dispense with the pleasantries. This board meeting has been properly convened according to company bylaws. As majority shareholders of Skyline Airways through Horizon Aviation Holdings, my wife and I move to begin the formal agenda." Whitman's smile faltered as he slowly lowered his hand. "Of course. However, before we proceed, our legal team has some questions about the structure of your acquisition that may impact voting rights." Eleanor stepped forward. "Your legal challenges were rejected by the court at 4:30 this morning, Mr. Whitman. The judge was particularly interested in the text messages between your employees specifically targeting us before we even boarded. I believe all board members received copies of those messages an hour ago?" Around the table, several executives nodded uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with Whitman. The institutional investor representatives looked particularly troubled, having been blindsided by both the discrimination incident and the ownership revelation. "Let's begin," Marcus stated, taking a seat directly opposite Whitman rather than displacing him at the head of the table, a strategic decision that demonstrated confidence without appearing petty. The Donovans' lead attorney distributed tablets to each person present. "We've prepared a comprehensive presentation. You'll find it loaded on these devices." Marcus tapped his own tablet, and the massive display screen on the wall came to life, showing the viral videos of their mistreatment. The footage played without commentary, the images speaking for themselves. Eleanor desperately trying to retrieve her medication, Marcus being slammed against the wall, blood trickling down his face while Veronica and Clayton mocked their claims of ownership. When the videos ended, the screen switched to data presentations, charts and graphs compiled from Skyline's own internal systems. Over the past 24 hours, Marcus explained, his voice steady and professional, our team has analyzed Skyline's customer complaint data for the past 5 years. Black passengers file complaints of discriminatory treatment at 11 times the rate of white passengers. These complaints are systematically classified as customer misunderstanding and dismissed without investigation. More charts appeared, showing staffing patterns, promotion rates, and customer service metrics broken down by race. Your company's first-class cabins are 87% white, despite your routes serving diverse metropolitan areas, Eleanor continued. Your executive team is 92% white. Of 217 discrimination complaints filed in the past year, 0 resulted in disciplinary action against employees. Philip Whitman shifted uncomfortably. These statistics can be interpreted in many ways. Correlation doesn't imply. We found the memos, Mr. Whitman, Marcus interrupted. The screen changed to show internal communications with certain passages highlighted. Your cabin culture initiative from 2018 explicitly instructed flight attendants to maintain the exclusive atmosphere passengers expect and ensure customers in premium cabins meet the appropriate profile. When asked to clarify these vague instructions in staff training, your VP of Customer Experience explained it meant keeping a certain element out of first class. The board members looked increasingly uncomfortable as more documents appeared on screen. Training materials, performance reviews praising flight attendants who maintained cabin standards, and internal communications that, while carefully worded to avoid explicit racial language, clearly promoted discriminatory practices. This isn't about one incident or 2 bad employees, Eleanor stated firmly. This is about systematic discrimination embedded in your corporate culture, Mr. Whitman. Culture flows from leadership. For the first time, Whitman looked genuinely rattled. These documents are being taken out of context. We have a diverse workforce and have won awards for inclusion. Performative diversity isn't inclusion, Marcus responded. Your company has created a system where discriminatory behavior is not just tolerated but rewarded. The incident my wife and I experienced wasn't an anomaly. It was your business model functioning exactly as designed. Eleanor opened an elegant leather portfolio. We've prepared a comprehensive action plan. First, the immediate termination of employees directly involved in discrimination incidents, including but not limited to Veronica Winters and Clayton Reed. Second, a complete overhaul of training protocols, hiring practices, and promotion criteria, supervised by an independent civil rights organization. Third, a comprehensive audit of customer complaint data, with appropriate compensation to passengers who experience discriminatory treatment. Fourth, Marcus continued, the establishment of a $100 million foundation to promote diversity in aviation and provide scholarships for minorities pursuing careers in the industry. He paused, making eye contact with each person around the table. And finally, the resignation of senior leadership who created and maintained this culture, beginning with you, Mr. Whitman. The boardroom fell silent. Several executives stared at the table, unable to meet the Donovans' gaze. The institutional investors' representatives were furiously taking notes, clearly calculating the financial and reputational implications of what they were hearing. Whitman finally found his voice. This is an overreaction to a single unfortunate incident. You're talking about dismantling a company I built over 30 years because of one misunderstanding. Marcus's expression hardened. Mr. Whitman, my wife and I started with nothing. I worked aircraft maintenance while putting myself through night school. Eleanor was one of the first black flight attendants at Coastal Airways in the 70s. We built our company despite discrimination, not by enabling it. You had 30 years to create an airline where all passengers are treated with dignity. You chose a different path. Eleanor opened a folder containing printouts of the defamatory articles and smear campaign materials from the previous night. You also chose to respond to valid criticism with character assassination rather than accountability. This morning, Our legal team filed defamation lawsuits against several media outlets who published false information at your instigation. That's a baseless accusation, Whitman protested. Marcus tapped his tablet again, and a new audio file began playing, a recording of Richard Dalton, Skyline's head of security, instructing private investigators to find or create dirt on the Donovans and plant stories with friendly media contacts. Whitman's face drained of color. Where did you get that? Mr. Dalton called one of our former security consultants, not realizing the connection, Marcus explained calmly. Our consultant recorded the conversation, as is legal in Georgia, with one-party consent. Eleanor addressed the other board members directly. We didn't acquire Skyline Airways to dismantle it, but to improve it. This company has tremendous potential with the right leadership and culture. The question before this board is simple. Will you be part of the solution, or will you defend practices that are not just morally wrong, but increasingly business liabilities? One of the institutional investor representatives cleared his throat. Speaking for Meridian Investments, we fully support the Donovans' proposed changes. The evidence presented is irrefutable, and the legal and financial risks of maintaining the status quo are unacceptable. Other investors quickly followed suit, sensing which way the wind was blowing. Within minutes, it became clear that Whitman had lost the support of the board. I built this airline from nothing, he said, his voice tight with anger. You can't just walk in here and... We can and we have, Marcus interrupted. The vote has been taken. The board has approved all proposed actions, including your removal as CEO, effective immediately. Whitman looked around desperately, but found no allies. This isn't over, he threatened as he gathered his papers. You haven't heard the last of this. Actually, Mr. Whitman, Eleanor replied calmly. Your separation agreement includes a comprehensive non-disclosure clause. We'll hear nothing further from you if you wish to receive your severance package. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. As if on cue, 2 security guards appeared at the boardroom door. The same security department that had once carried out Whitman's orders was now enforcing those of the Donovans. The symmetry wasn't lost on Marcus. As Whitman was escorted out, he turned to the remaining board members. This is just the beginning of Skyline's transformation. By this afternoon, we'll announce a new interim leadership team. By next week, we'll implement the first phase of anti-discrimination training. And by year's end, Skyline Airways will set the industry standard for equitable treatment of all passengers. As the board meeting concluded, Marcus and Eleanor stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over Atlanta, the city where they had built their business empire, and where they would now reshape an industry that had too long tolerated discrimination. Was it worth it? Eleanor asked quietly, referring not just to the humiliation they had endured on that flight, but to the decades of subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination they had faced throughout their careers. Marcus took her hand, his expression resolute. If it means no one else has to experience what we did, absolutely. What would you do if you were in the Donovans' position? Comment number 1 if you would focus on removing those directly responsible like Veronica and Clayton, or number 2, if you would push for complete systemic change like the Donovans did. Drop a like if you believe in holding corporations accountable for the culture they create. How far do you think Whitman and his allies will go to fight back against these changes? Could they still sabotage the Donovans' vision for a more inclusive airline? The battle may be won, but the war for lasting change is just beginning. The Donovans moved quickly after taking control of Skyline Airways. They installed Eleanor's trusted deputy from Horizon Aviation, Tiana Johnson, as interim CEO with a mandate to conduct a thorough investigation into the company's discriminatory practices. Tiana, a former aviation attorney with 15 years of executive experience, assembled a diverse team of internal and external investigators to examine every aspect of Skyline's operations. What they uncovered was far worse than the Donovans had initially suspected. A comprehensive audit of customer data revealed a disturbing pattern. Black passengers with identical frequent flyer status to their white counterparts were denied first-class upgrades at nearly 5 times the rate. The algorithm used to determine upgrades contained variables for customer fit that essentially functioned as a proxy for race without explicitly stating it. Look at this, Tiana said during a briefing with Marcus and Eleanor 3 weeks after the takeover. She displayed a document recovered from a senior marketing director's archived emails. Instructions to gate agents about maintaining cabin composition, with specific quotas for how many non-traditional customers should be allowed in premium cabins. The Donovans reviewed the document with growing dismay. The thinly veiled language provided plausible deniability, while clearly communicating racist intent. No direct mentions of race appeared, but phrases like passengers who reflect our brand image and customers who might make our core demographic uncomfortable were transparent in their meaning. More evidence emerged as employees, now protected by a robust whistleblower policy implemented by the new leadership, came forward with testimonies. A former reservation supervisor revealed she had been instructed to flag bookings made with ethnic-sounding names for additional verification. A baggage handler described witnessing black passengers' complaints about missing luggage being systematically dismissed. A former human resources employee produced documentation showing qualified minority candidates were routinely rejected for customer-facing positions based on subjective assessments of brand fit. The investigation expanded beyond individual incidents to examine structural barriers throughout the company. The diversity statistics were damning. Only 4% of pilots were people of color, compared to industry averages of 11%. Less than 7% of executives were non-white. The few minority employees who had achieved management positions were concentrated in departments with little decision-making power. This goes deeper than Whitman, Eleanor observed as they reviewed the findings. This is embedded in every system and process. The most shocking discovery came when investigators uncovered a proprietary internal software system used by flight attendants to track passenger concerns. The innocuous-sounding program allowed crew members to add special notes to passenger profiles. In theory, this was designed to track medical needs or severe service failures. In practice, it had become a shadow system for racial profiling. Investigators found codes like TC, tone control needed, and SS, special scrutiny, disproportionately, attached to profiles of black passengers and other minorities. Once flagged, these passengers received heightened scrutiny on future flights and were often denied service upgrades regardless of their status or ticket class. When the internal investigation was complete, the Donovans faced a critical decision: handle the matter privately with internal reforms or make the findings public. After much deliberation, they chose transparency. Skyline Airways announces comprehensive investigation findings and reform agenda, read the press release headline. The detailed report, published in full on the company website, documented every discriminatory practice discovered, acknowledged the harm caused, and outlined specific remedial actions. The public response was immediate and polarized. Civil rights organizations praised the Donovans' courage in exposing systematic discrimination within their own company. Industry analysts questioned the business wisdom of airing such damaging information. Competitors distanced themselves publicly while privately scrambling to examine their own practices. Former CEO Philip Whitman, speaking through an attorney, despite his NDA, dismissed the findings as selective interpretation of standard industry practices by new owners with a political agenda. His statement only reinforced the perception that discrimination had been deliberate and led from the top. What truly transformed the situation from a single company's scandal into an industry watershed moment was the FAA's announcement of a broader investigation into discriminatory practices across all major U.S. airlines. Inspired by the Donovans' transparency, passengers began sharing similar experiences with other carriers, many with video evidence. The hashtag expanded from Togger Skyline Shame to Duck Airline Accountability, creating pressure on the entire industry. Class action lawsuits soon followed. Within 2 months of the Donovans' takeover, Skyline Airways faced legal action from hundreds of minority passengers who had experienced discrimination. Rather than fight these claims, the new leadership took an unprecedented approach. They acknowledged liability and established a special compensation fund for victims with an independent panel to evaluate claims. We don't want to drag victims through years of litigation, Marcus explained to shareholders. We accept responsibility for past wrongs and are committed to making it right, both financially and through fundamental changes to our operations. While many business analysts predicted financial disaster from this strategy, the Donovans understood something essential about the changing marketplace. Transparency and accountability could actually strengthen a brand in the long run, as other airlines continued to deny or minimize similar allegations. Skyline's forthright approach began to differentiate it positively in consumers' minds. By the end of the third month, the systematic exposure of Skyline's discriminatory practices had evolved from a potential company killer to a case study in crisis management and corporate transformation. The Donovans had turned the humiliation they experienced into an opportunity for industry-wide reform, forcing competitors to address issues they had long ignored. What no one yet realized was that the most dangerous phase of the transition was still to come, as those who had profited from the old system plotted their revenge. Philip Whitman had not built an airline empire by accepting defeat gracefully. Though officially removed from Skyline Airways with a generous severance package, he seethed with resentment at his public humiliation. The non-disclosure agreement he'd signed prevented him from speaking publicly about the company, but it didn't stop him from acting behind the scenes. 6 weeks after his ouster, Whitman convened a private meeting at his lakeside mansion. The attendees included Clayton Reed and Veronica Winters, both terminated without severance after the investigation, along with several senior executives who had resigned rather than work under the new leadership. Also present was Richard Dalton, the former head of security, whose technical expertise would prove crucial to their plans. "They think they can erase 30 years of my work and turn my airline into some social justice experiment," Whitman told the group, pacing his opulent living room. "They've forgotten who built the systems they're now dismantling. Their plan was as simple as it was devastating. Sabotage Skyline's operations at every level, creating chaos that would be attributed to the new management's incompetence. With their intimate knowledge of the airline's systems and the backdoor access codes Dalton had preserved before his departure, they could wreak havoc from the outside." The attack began subtly. Skyline's reservation system suddenly showed phantom overbookings on key routes, creating confusion at check-in counters. Crew scheduling software developed mysterious glitches, resulting in flight delays when pilots or attendants were incorrectly assigned. These issues could be explained as technical problems, but they damaged the passenger experience and the company's reliability metrics. As these technical difficulties mounted, anonymous sources began feeding stories to transportation reporters, suggesting the problem stemmed from the Donovans' rushed changes and inexperienced leadership. Industry publications ran analyses questioning whether an investment holding company had the expertise to run an airline operational enterprise. The sabotage escalated when someone with administrative credentials accessed Skyline's customer database and leaked selected portions containing personal information of celebrity and business executive travelers. The leak was carefully engineered to implicate the new security team's alleged carelessness. The resulting privacy scandal created a fresh wave of negative publicity just as the airline was beginning to recover from the discrimination revelations. For the Donovans, these operational challenges were frustrating but manageable. What came next was far more personal and dangerous. Anonymous death threats began arriving at their home and offices. Their private phone numbers and home address were posted on dark web forums frequented by white supremacist groups, along with false claims that they had fired white employees en masse to implement racial quotas. The situation turned life-threatening when Eleanor, still managing her heart condition, suffered a stress-induced cardiac episode after a particularly graphic threat. She was hospitalized for 3 days, while doctors adjusted her medication and monitored her condition. Marcus remained at her bedside, temporarily stepping back from direct involvement in Skyline's management. It was during this hospital stay that the most brazen attack occurred. As Marcus left the hospital late one evening to retrieve personal items from their home, a black SUV with tinted windows attempted to force his car off the road on a secluded stretch of highway. Only his defensive driving training and quick reflexes prevented a potentially fatal crash. The SUV disappeared before police could respond, and no license plate had been visible. The FBI became involved after this incident, classifying it as a potential attempted murder with corporate terrorism implications. Their investigation quickly traced the escalating attacks back to a coordinated effort. Though proving Whitman's direct involvement remained difficult, as he had carefully maintained plausible deniability. Meanwhile, online harassment campaigns targeted Skyline's new diverse leadership team. Veronica Winters, using anonymous accounts, orchestrated social media attacks against Tiana Johnson, the interim CEO, spreading false rumors about her professional qualifications and personal life. Clayton Reed leveraged his connections with aviation blogs to plant stories questioning the safety protocols under the new management, despite safety metrics showing improvement. The most damaging blow came when hackers breached the Donovans' home security system during a night when they had finally returned from the hospital. Security camera footage later showed 3 masked individuals entering the property, clearly familiar with the layout. The Donovans' private security detail, alerted by backup systems, responded before the intruders could reach the main house, but the message was clear: nowhere was truly safe. FBI agents, reviewing the sophisticated nature of the security breach, determined it required insider knowledge of the specific system and its vulnerabilities. The evidence pointed directly to Richard Dalton, whose expertise in security systems was well documented. This has gone far beyond corporate rivalry, the lead FBI agent told Marcus after the home invasion attempt. We're dealing with organized criminal conspiracy and potential attempted murder charges. The psychological toll on the Donovans was immense. They had expected resistance to change, even some underhanded tactics from those displaced by their reforms. But the viciousness and life-threatening nature of the retaliation exceeded anything they had anticipated. They want us to give up, Eleanor told Marcus from her hospital bed after the security breach. To decide Skyline isn't worth our lives. Marcus took her hand, his expression resolute despite the strain evident in his eyes. That's exactly why we can't back down. This isn't just about an airline anymore. This is about whether power and privilege can violently silence those who challenge systemic injustice. The FBI investigation accelerated, with agents now monitoring Whitman's communications and movements. Electronic evidence began accumulating as the conspirators, growing bolder with each successful attack, became less cautious in their communications. Richard Dalton made the critical mistake of using a personal device to access Skyline systems during a particularly damaging sabotage operation, creating an electronic fingerprint that investigators could trace. As federal agents closed in, the Donovans refused to retreat into safety or abandon their vision for Skyline Airways. Instead, they increased security while maintaining their public presence and reform agenda. They understood that visibility, not hiding, was their greatest protection. The more public attention remained on their story, the harder it became for their attackers to operate in the shadows. The retaliation had been brutal, personal, and nearly deadly. But it had failed in its primary objective. The Donovans would not be intimidated into abandoning their mission. Instead, the attacks only strengthened their resolve and accelerated the timeline for implementing the changes that Whitman and his allies had fought so desperately to prevent. Early on a Tuesday morning, coordinated FBI raids targeted multiple locations across Atlanta and neighboring suburbs. Philip Whitman was arrested at his country club, handcuffed discreetly but firmly, while fellow members watched in shock. Richard Dalton was taken into custody at his lake house, where agents discovered sophisticated hacking equipment and detailed notes on the Donovans' security systems. Veronica Winters was apprehended at the airport, attempting to board a flight to the Cayman Islands with a newly issued passport under an assumed name. The most dramatic arrest occurred when Clayton Reed was discovered hiding at a remote hunting cabin registered to Whitman's brother-in-law. Reed initially attempted to flee, but surrendered when confronted by a significant FBI presence. Inside the cabin, agents found weapons and documents outlining future plans for sabotaging Skyline operations on a massive scale. 13 individuals have been arrested in connection with what prosecutors are calling an unprecedented campaign of corporate sabotage and personal retaliation, announced the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia at a press conference that afternoon. The charges include conspiracy, computer fraud, identity theft, interstate transmission of threats, attempted murder, and multiple violations of federal aviation safety regulations. The evidence against the conspirators was overwhelming. Richard Dalton's devices contained records of the security system breaches. Veronica Winter's laptop held dozens of fake social media accounts used to spread disinformation. Most damning of all, Philip Whitman's personal phone revealed text messages directing various aspects of the campaign and explicitly discussing making the Donovans regret taking my airline. As the criminal proceedings began, Marcus Donovan was called to testify before a special congressional committee examining discrimination in the transportation industry. His testimony, broadcast live on major networks, provided a powerful first-hand account of how racial bias persisted in systems, ostensibly designed to serve all Americans equally. What my wife and I experienced was not exceptional, Marcus explained to the committee members. It was simply exceptional that we had the resources and position to do something about it. For every incident captured on video, thousands occur, without documentation, affecting passengers who lack our platform or financial security. His testimony, measured and factual rather than emotional, resonated across political lines. Conservative committee members who had initially been skeptical found themselves confronted with irrefutable data and a witness whose business credentials they respected. Liberal members who expected fiery rhetoric instead received actionable, policy recommendations based on decades of business experience. The committee hearing coincided with Eleanor Donovan's own powerful moment in the public eye. Still recovering from her cardiac episode, she delivered a virtual address from her hospital room that was streamed to a national conference on corporate diversity. Her appearance, dignified despite obvious signs of her health challenges, humanized the consequences of the discrimination and subsequent retaliation in ways that statistics could not. The physical wounds heal, she told the audience, gesturing to the medical equipment surrounding her. What persists is the knowledge that to some, our dignity remains negotiable based on the color of our skin. That reality creates wounds no medication can treat. Her speech was shared millions of times across social media platforms, creating renewed public pressure on other airlines to examine their own practices. Several major carriers hastily announced new training initiatives and policy reviews, attempting to get ahead of the scrutiny that was now spreading industry-wide. Meanwhile, at Skyline Airways, the transformation continued under the Donovans' vision but with increasingly broad support. The interim leadership team led by Tiana Johnson implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination policies that became a model for the industry. Training programs were overhauled to address implicit bias. Hiring practices were redesigned to eliminate systemic barriers to diversity. Customer service protocols were rebuilt around principles of equal treatment and dignity for all passengers. Most importantly, these changes were accompanied by rigorous metrics and transparency. Monthly reports tracked progress in addressing discrimination complaints, diversity in hiring and promotion, and equitable treatment in service delivery. The data showed improvement across all measures, though the Donovans were careful to acknowledge that sustainable change would require ongoing vigilance. The criminal cases against Whitman and his co-conspirators proceeded rapidly, with prosecutors presenting evidence so compelling that several defendants quickly sought plea agreements. Richard Dalton was the first to cooperate, providing detailed testimony about Whitman's orchestration of the entire campaign. Others followed, each revelation adding to the picture of an extensive criminal conspiracy motivated by revenge and racial animus. Philip Whitman maintained his innocence until a dramatic courtroom moment when prosecutors played a recording recovered from his home safe, a conversation in which he explicitly ordered the attempted vehicular assault on Marcus outside the hospital. "I don't care how it's done," his voice rang out in the silent courtroom. "Just make sure it looks like an accident." The former CEO's face drained of color as his own words condemned him. By day's end, his attorneys were negotiating a plea agreement that would still result in substantial prison time, but avoid the maximum sentences he faced. In an unexpected twist that demonstrated how thoroughly the industry landscape had changed, the FAA announced comprehensive new regulations requiring airlines to track and report data on passenger treatment by demographic categories. The rules, developed with input from civil rights organizations and industry experts, created accountability mechanisms where none had previously existed. As the criminal proceedings neared conclusion and Skyline's operational metrics showed recovery from the sabotage campaign, Marcus and Eleanor Donovan could finally focus on the broader vision that had motivated their acquisition in the first place, creating an airline that set new standards for equitable treatment while remaining commercially successful. The final piece of their justice journey came when they confronted Philip Whitman directly. After his guilty plea but before sentencing, they requested a meeting through their attorneys. Initially reluctant, Whitman eventually agreed, perhaps hoping to somehow influence their victim impact statements. In a small conference room at the federal courthouse, the three principals in the Skyline drama sat face-to-face for the first time since the boardroom confrontation. Whitman, stripped of his corporate power and facing years in prison, seemed physically diminished in his orange jumpsuit. "Why did you want this meeting?" he asked, unable to maintain eye contact with either Donovan. "Not for an apology," Eleanor replied calmly. "We don't expect or require that from you. We wanted you to know exactly what will happen to the airline you claim to care about," Marcus continued. "Skyline will thrive based on principles of equality and dignity. The employees you manipulated will receive proper training and support. The discriminatory systems you created will be dismantled. And your legacy," Eleanor added, "will not be destroying something good, but inadvertently creating the opportunity for something better to emerge." Whitman had no response. As the Donovans rose to leave, Marcus delivered a final statement. "The airline industry will never be the same, and that's a good thing." Justice had unfolded, not just in the criminal courts, but in the broader transformations their ordeal had set in motion. What began as a humiliating incident in first class had catalyzed changes that would benefit countless passengers for decades to come. 1 year after the viral video that exposed discrimination at Skyline Airways, the company hosted a special anniversary flight from Seattle to Boston, the route Marcus and Eleanor Donovan had originally intended to take to their granddaughter's graduation. This time, however, the occasion was markedly different. The completely refurbished aircraft featured Skyline's new branding and logo, which subtly incorporated themes of inclusion and diversity without resorting to tokenism. More significantly, it showcased the airline's comprehensive transformation under the Donovans' leadership. In the terminal before boarding, Eleanor Donovan, fully recovered from her health challenges, addressed the assembled media and specials. "Guess why we're Today isn't about dwelling on past injustices," she explained. "It's about demonstrating what's possible when an organization commits wholly to treating every customer with equal dignity and respect." The flight crew exemplified the new Skyline, diverse not just in racial background, but in age, gender, and physical ability. The captain, a black woman with 20 years of flying experience who had previously been passed over for promotion multiple times under the old leadership, welcomed passengers aboard with professional warmth. In first class, the Donovans were seated together in 3A and 3B, the same seats they had originally booked a year earlier. This time, however, they were welcomed by a flight attendant who offered the same impeccable service she provided to every passenger, regardless of appearance or background. Skyline Airways had emerged from its crisis stronger than before, defying industry analysts who had predicted financial disaster. While initial boycotts and negative publicity had indeed damaged quarterly results, the company's transparent approach to addressing discrimination had ultimately resonated with consumers increasingly concerned about corporate social responsibility. The financial turnaround had been remarkable. After 2 quarters of losses during the transition, Skyline posted record profits under its new diverse leadership team. Customer satisfaction scores reached all-time highs. Employee retention improved dramatically as the toxic workplace culture was replaced with one that valued equity and merit-based advancement. Behind these business metrics were structural changes that transformed the passenger experience. The discriminatory algorithm that had governed upgrade decisions was replaced with a transparent system based solely on loyalty program status and purchase timing. Customer complaint procedures were overhauled to ensure all issues received equal consideration, regardless of who reported them. Most importantly, the company implemented rigorous training programs addressing implicit bias with regular refreshers and accountability mechanisms. These weren't superficial diversity seminars, but comprehensive approaches integrated into every aspect of operations, from hiring to customer service to supplier relationships. The airline industry as a whole had been forced to evolve in response to Skyline's example. Competitors initially criticized the Donovans' approach as excessive and pandering, But as consumers began actively choosing Skyline for its ethical practices, other carriers scrambled to implement similar reforms. What had begun as one company's crisis response became an industry-wide recalibration. The criminal cases against the former executives had concluded with justice that many considered appropriate to their crimes. Philip Whitman received a 12-year federal prison sentence for his role in orchestrating the sabotage campaign and the attempted vehicular assault on Marcus. Richard Dalton was sentenced to 8 years for his technical role in the conspiracy. Veronica Winters and Clayton Reed received shorter sentences, but were permanently barred from working in the transportation industry upon release. As the anniversary flight cruised at altitude, Marcus and Eleanor walked through the cabin, speaking briefly with passengers and crew members. They weren't doing this as owners conducting an inspection, but as advocates checking that their vision was being properly implemented. What they found consistently pleased them: crew members providing equal service to everyone, diverse passengers feeling welcome in all cabin classes, an atmosphere of genuine respect rather than enforced tolerance. In Boston, the Donovans were greeted by their granddaughter Zoe, now pursuing her PhD in aerospace engineering, with a focus on environmental sustainability in aviation. She had become part of Skyline's future too, heading a research partnership between the airline and MIT to develop more fuel-efficient flight systems. "Grandma, Grandpa, you actually made it this time without getting kicked off the plane," she teased as she embraced them, the family's ability to find humor in their ordeal, a testament to their resilience. That evening, at a private dinner with Skyline's new executive team, Marcus raised a toast that encapsulated their journey to transformation that comes not despite adversity, but because of it. "What happened to Eleanor and me was unjust, but the justice that emerged has benefited far more people than just us." The transformation extended beyond Skyline Airways. The Donovans had established the Aviation Equity Foundation with a $100 million endowment, providing scholarships for minority students pursuing careers in commercial aviation and aerospace. The foundation also funded research into discrimination in transportation and advocated for policy reforms at the federal level. Their most personal initiative was the Donovan Fellows Program, which identified promising young people from underrepresented backgrounds and provided them with mentorship, education, and career development in the aviation industry. The first class of 50 fellows had already begun their training, with guaranteed positions at Skyline or partner organizations upon completion. As Eleanor watched these young people developing into the industry's future leaders, she reflected on how different their experience would be from her own early career struggles. They would still face challenges, certainly. Systemic racism wasn't eliminated by one company's reforms, but they would enter an industry more aware of its failings and more committed to addressing them. The symbolic culmination of the year's transformation came when the Donovans finally attended their granddaughter's department ceremony at MIT, where she received special recognition for her research. As they proudly watched Zoe accept her award, they represented not just a family celebrating an achievement, but a living example of how confronting injustice with determined dignity could create change that extended far beyond one incident or one company. On the return flight to Atlanta, Eleanor glanced out the window at the clouds below, and then at the diverse crew moving confidently through the cabin. "Was it worth it?" she asked Marcus, echoing the question she had posed a year earlier in the boardroom after Whitman's removal. Marcus took her hand, his answer the same but with even greater conviction based on all they had accomplished. "If it means no one else has to experience what we did? Absolutely." What had begun as a humiliating incident of discrimination had become a transformative victory, not just for the Donovans personally, but for countless passengers who would never know how different their travel experience might have been without that pivotal confrontation in first class. Some battles create ripples that become waves, changing landscapes far beyond the original conflict zone. This was such a battle. One seated couple standing firm against injustice had ultimately transformed an entire industry's approach to human dignity. This powerful story offers several profound lessons about confronting discrimination and creating meaningful change. First, it demonstrates that real transformation often requires those with power and resources to stand firm against injustice. The Donovans used their privilege and position not just for personal vindication, but to create systemic change benefiting countless others who lacked their resources. Second, it reveals how discrimination is rarely limited to isolated incidents but typically reflects deeper cultural and organizational problems. What appeared to be a single case of racial profiling on a flight was actually symptomatic of entrenched, discriminatory practices throughout the entire company. Third, the story illustrates that accountability must exist at every level. Individual actors like Veronica and Clayton needed to face consequences, but so did the executives who created systems enabling discriminatory behavior. Fourth, it shows that meaningful change requires both immediate action and long-term commitment. The Donovans didn't simply fire those directly responsible. They implemented comprehensive reforms, established educational programs, and created metrics to measure ongoing progress. Finally, this narrative reminds us that standing against injustice often comes with significant personal cost. The Donovans faced harassment, threats, and even physical danger for challenging the status quo. Yet their persistence ultimately transformed not just one airline, but an entire industry's approach to equality and respect. The most important lesson may be that change, though difficult and sometimes dangerous, is always possible when people refuse to accept discriminatory treatment as inevitable or unchangeable. What experience with discrimination have you witnessed or experienced while traveling? Would you have had the courage to stand up like the Donovans did, or would you have simply filed a complaint and moved on? Comment below with your thoughts on how we can all contribute to creating more equitable spaces in our daily lives, whether we have the Donovans' resources or not. If this story moved you or made you think differently about how discrimination operates in seemingly respectable institutions, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories that expose injustice and celebrate those fighting for change. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that confronting discrimination isn't just about individual incidents, but about transforming entire systems. Thank you for watching, and remember, true dignity comes not from how others treat us, but from how we respond when that treatment is unjust. May we all find the courage to stand firm when faced with discrimination, knowing that our actions today can create a more equitable tomorrow.